Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Progressive Podcast. We have a very special guest today, Marianne Williamson. Marianne is a best-selling author, political activist, and former Democratic presidential candidate, two-time presidential candidate. She also was formerly Oprah Winfrey's spiritual advisor. So we covered a ton in this episode. It was a great interview. How Democrats can move forward successfully and learn the right lessons. She also gave us some great advice, and great advice for anyone around our age or just in general about how to move forward in such a chaotic world right now and just the right mindset to have. So it was a super interesting conversation. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. So let's just get right into it. Here's our conversation with Marianne Williamson.
One of the problems I have with the left sometimes is people, I think our knowledge of history is so important. And sometimes, on the right, people won't admit that we ever did anything wrong.
Yes.
But on the left, there are people who won't admit that we ever did anything right.
Exactly.
And both of those views really pervert and revise history that's very important to know and to remember.
Yeah. It's really interesting that you mentioned that. Talking about things we've done right, I've been reading Mark J. Dunkelman's Who Killed Progress and How to Bring It Back. And he talks a lot about the battle in the progressive movement about Hamiltonian ideology versus Jeffersonian, decentralization, centralization, and the current moment about decentralizing power, but also centralizing it and putting us in this weird lockstep, right? Where we're so afraid the government will do bad things. I think this is a good time about the LBJ stuff, foreign and also Nixon domestic, but we don't allow the government to do things, but then we want it to do things. We want to empower it to fight climate change and a lot of these things, but we don't want it to cause problems. And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on progress and future.
In general, federalism is important. Alexander Hamilton said that the states were the laboratories of reform. The problem is that we're living at a time when let the states handle it has become code for some very extreme right-wing perspectives. When they tried to take environmental processes away from the national federal control, this was to make it 50 times harder for us to actually get things done because we were going to have to fight it on all 50 states. Even now, getting rid of the Department of Education, if you just give it to the states, there are states in this country who are going to, where our classrooms are just going to become hotbeds of Christian nationalism and complete revisionism of our history in all the ways that we've already seen begin to play out. So if you're just talking about it theoretically, there's something pretty fantastic about the fact that a lot is left in the hands of the states and, they are laboratories of reform and so forth. And sometimes they are. So it's not like you don't want to respect the theory. It's just that you have to be realistic. You look at, it did take federal marshals to desegregate the schools and so forth. So nothing on any piece of paper, no matter how brilliant, can compensate for mean-spiritedness and lack of ethics within people. And I think one of the ways that we try to align ourselves with the better angels of our nature is by learning history, and understanding. If you're a kid in school in the 7th grade, so many states in America today don't even require half a year of study of American history, American government, American, anything that's important in how we work in this country. So it should be 7th graders discussing that. 7th graders should be understanding, well, we have a federal system and the states are the laboratories of reform and but we also have federal standards. And that's the kind of thing 7th graders should be understanding and working through.
Yeah. There's a Pete Buttigieg interview from shortly after the election that I've been thinking a lot about the last few weeks, watching all the chaos unfold with Doge and Elon Musk, where he was saying that Republicans, there's kind of a cycle of power in government where Republicans, when they get in power, they purposely make government agencies worse and they make it so they run worse, they sabotage them. And then that happens, people see how poorly these government programs perform, and then they're able to call for cutting them more. They're able to say, government doesn't even work for you, why would you bother voting for it? And so I was wondering, what are your thoughts on that concept? And is there really, like, I feel like Democrats are at a bit of a disadvantage where it's a lot easier to destroy something than to build it up, especially with our government. And so how do you see us kind of like counteracting that strategy that seems to have been the Republican Party strategy for decades now?
I don't know if it's been the Republican Party strategy for decades, but it's absolutely the Republican Party strategy right now, specifically Musk and the techno-billionaire bros. Remember, these guys are out to destroy the U.S. government. It's a very classic hostile takeover like you see in business. So you want to break up the parts, and then they're distressed parts, and then you can sell them off. That's really what's happening here. It's a privatization plan. And it's not only a privatization plan, it's basically a dictatorial plan, because these guys actually think they would do it better. So in the way that you just described, they're trying to prove to the American people, see, it doesn't work. I'll give you an example. Social Security, it actually works fine, thank you. But by taking out 12% of the workforce, Governor O'Malley, who used to be head of the Social Security department, said, if you take away 12% of the workforce, the whole system could collapse within 2 or 3 months. So that's what they're doing. They're out to ruin everything so that then they say to the American people, see, it's not working. The only answer is to give it to the private sector that could do such a better job. The things that the president, for instance, said the other night in his, well, it's not called the State of the Union the first year, but in his speech to Congress, giving all those lies, that's been so debunked. As everybody knows now, it's not transgender mice, it's transgenic mice, and this has to do with the eradication of disease and how important that research is. Also, when he talked about the African LGBTQ plus program he said that nation that nobody's ever heard of. Meanwhile, Musk is actually doing business in that nation. That nation said, protested that they've been treated like that in that speech. Even more importantly for me, I don't know what the facts are, but I know that being gay in Uganda is punishable by death. So there are programs that where we are spending money to help gay people in Africa. This is no joke. So what the president is trying to do, once again, is just to make it look like all they do is inept and horrible and a ridiculous abuse and a ridiculous waste of money. Now, remember, Bill Clinton had gotten rid of, I think, over 400,000 jobs, but it was through a program that was a very deliberative process.
It was passed by Congress, correct?
Absolutely. But then also interesting that you say that, because did you see the New York Times article today about the meeting at the White House yesterday?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was heated, right?
Yeah. So apparently the president, he said, so we'll see what happens. But the president said yesterday, okay, enough of this, because he really heard the complaints from cabinet members. He said, from now on, Elon, your role will not be that you have the power to just fire people. It will be recommendation and advisory, which is what we've been told in the campaign. And he also said from now on, it'll be a scalpel and not a hatchet. So that would be marvelous. As we know, Musk and his henchmen, they know nothing about government. They know nothing about these programs. They're not taking the time to ask. He actually said to his little team there, if you see a regulation that seems dumb, just scratch it. He's got the password. It's unbelievable. He's got the passwords into everything. He's deleted pages. We don't know where those pages are.
All of our information, our Social Security information. He has
Absolutely.
all of that. And the 20-year-olds that he's employing.
Right.
And I thought it was incredibly ironic in the speech when Trump bragged that the era of being ruled by unelected bureaucrats is over, as if this isn't the ultimate example of that.
The ultimate example, and the ultimate example of corruption. Did you see today where the FAA said that the falling debris from SpaceX interrupted 240 flights?
They couldn't fly in until 8 p.m. yesterday.
So, I mean, if you read that article, I mean, I consider that what happened yesterday, a little bit of a win. But that's absolutely what they're trying to do, is to destroy the government, to then be able to convince people that obviously democracy does not work. We have to give it all to the private sector. They're the only people who know how to do anything. That's the plan.
How do you break through to the Republican base when they do believe, kind of circling back to what you said, that the private sector and billionaires are the correct people to cut government waste? How do you convince the Republican base, the voter base, that this is actually not the case, Because it just seems like there's a lot of misinformation on that, and voters are voting to take away Social Security or their Medicaid benefits or things like that. How do you break through to that cohort?
By giving them what they should have been given for the last few decades when Democrats were in power. If people had had universal health care, like in every other, in every other advanced democracy, if we hadn't, the Republicans started this madness, but no Democrat stopped it. It's been going on for 50 years, this massive $50 trillion transfer of wealth on the bottom 90%. When you have a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, it hasn't been changed since 2009. Well, let me tell you something. There have been quite a few Democratic presidents since then. And so people have not seen the Democrats fighting for them, even when Democrats have. Republicans don't walk their talk, but sometimes Democrats don't talk their walk. They are doing what they're doing in closed rooms, and they don't brag enough.
Exactly.
What I think about is when a lot of the Democrats during the joint session of Congress, the speech that the president gave, they walked out of the speech without really making any sort of fuss. Al Green made a large fuss, and I think that caught a lot of headlines, but just walking out without saying anything or standing up for your beliefs doesn't really do much. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then there were videos, everybody talked about how nasty Al Green was. I think what he did was good. I mean, he comes from a district in Houston where Medicaid makes a difference between life and death for people. So he's not real concerned if a bunch of privileged white people thought he was being impolite. And if you look in the last day or two, there was quite a bit of footage of, I think it was Biden's last address, last State of the Union, and how the Republicans, absolutely. And by the way, if you look at American history, as you know, that's what they do. I mean, about 100 years ago, they started caning one another. I mean, that's kind of America. I mean, look at Britain.
That's the beauty of democracy.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, this tight,
polite,
let's all be polite while people are dying shit doesn't work for me.
Engaged debate. And Marianne, I just wanted to touch on something we're talking about with Democrats is I feel like when Democrats are in power, good things tend to happen, but at the same time, we don't, like you said, we don't talk about them. So who knows how many Americans know that Medicaid and Medicare was started by a Democrat? Generally speaking, how many Americans
Social Security
know this?
was Franklin Roosevelt in 1932. Medicare and Medicaid, of course, Lyndon Johnson.
Are we afraid to run on these issues? Like, what's going on here?
Well, it is very, I was reading an article yesterday. As it turns out, the messaging pros for the Democratic Party don't know any more than a regular person. Duh. There's power in just saying what you think.
Yes.
But when you are obviously trying to figure out what to think, Kamala Harris was a perfect example of this. Somebody would ask her a question and you could see the wheels turning. What am I supposed to say? Now, the part of the brain that rationally analyzes an issue is not the same part of the brain as that which decides who to vote for. The part that decides who to vote for is who feels real to me and has a spine. So every time, and it was interesting because I saw at that time some old footage, like 20 years old, of her on the old Larry King show. Yeah. And she just said what she thought, and she was a far more attractive political
figure. When she was in California, when she was attorney general, you see those, and some on the left will criticize her for some of her policies, but at least she went out there and spoke her mind, and she did that a lot in California.
That's what people like. That's what people vote for. That's why they vote. Yeah,
being authentic, and I really think it was the Biden people. To be frankly honest with you, from the beginning, we saw this in the beginning in 2021 when she gave an interview that didn't go out too well. I think she was in Honduras about the border. I was reading that they completely cut her off from interviews.
Well, yes, and a woman decides for herself what to say and what not to say. I think they also did that, though, to Governor Walz. When you hear him now, he's this cool guy. Clearly, they were trying to make him into someone else during the campaign. But that's an example, rather than just being authentic. And I can tell you from having been in the belly of that beast, they don't want anyone speaking from the gut. They want everything vetted through what would be okay with our donor base.
The consultant class, and they go over everything. And it's I feel like the Republicans, look, I disagree with them and their rhetoric is dangerous, but it feels like they aren't bullshitting me. I'm not getting bullshitted by them.
Well, it's the ultimate bullshit, but they really mean the bullshit is really what you're saying.
Exactly. They mean the bullshit.
Yeah, the people say he's authentic. Yeah, he's authentically a jerk.
Trying to take away your health care. He's authentically trying to cut your Medicaid.
Yeah, he's authentically trying to. But this with the Democrats not providing what should have been provided if you were really aligning your policies with the principle of unabashed advocacy for the working people of the United States. If the Democrats had been holding to that, this would never have happened. If Barack Obama had simply been the president that he campaigned saying he would be in 2008, he was given the White House, he was given the Senate, and he was given the
60
House.
senators.
Yeah, but he was given it for 70 days. Like, hold on, let's remember this is a very different coalition
too. For 2 years, he had control. Yeah. He didn't have the 60, but he had control for 2 years. And there were things which, if George Bush did them, we would scream bloody murder. If Barack Obama did them, we go, oh, poor baby. They wouldn't let him when there was absolutely no evidence that he had even tried. So the Democratic Party has developed this bizarre and very dysfunctional codependent relationship with the Democratic elite. When I was growing up, the Democrats were the free thinkers. We were the cool people. If you look at MAGA, for instance, they will put these guys in power. But then once they get there, MAGA doesn't like what they're doing, MAGA lets them know. And that even includes Trump. What has happened in the last few years, and I have experienced it on such a level, it's almost cult-like. No, whatever the DNC says. The DNC says we're going with Biden. Who the hell are they and what do they know?
Exactly.
And they thought in 2024 that, according to their supposedly superior wisdom, Trump was such a threat to democracy, you see, that we must suppress democracy in our House just to get Biden elected because we've decided he's the one who could beat him because he beat him last time. Well, that's like saying to an actor, you won the Oscar last year, so you'll win the Oscar this year. It's a different movie. It's a different script, and it's a different moment. For me, if we're really going to look at root cause here, I feel that there have been a lot of ways that the Democratic Party, starting with Clinton, sort of tried to have it both ways. Wanted people to feel like we feel your pain and we want to help you, but not so far as to cross the line beyond which we would be offending our corporate donors. So the disingenuous nature of the Democratic Party too often, the hypocrisy of the Democratic Party, if you has been a problem, and if you have even, you were talking about history, if you have even the most rudimentary knowledge of history, you know that nothing is more dangerous than large groups of desperate people. They form a petri dish out of which all manner of societal and personal dysfunction becomes almost inevitable. And that always includes ideological capture by dangerous forces and often an attraction to a political strongman. So by allowing this $50 trillion transfer of wealth, by allowing this drift away from resources from the public sphere that allowed people to thrive, I want to tell you guys something that it will seem like I'm describing a fairyland to you, okay? In the 1970s, the average American couple could afford a house. In the 1970s, the average American couple could afford for one parent to stay home and be with the kids all day if they chose. In the 1970s, the average American could afford a yearly vacation, and they could afford to send their kid and a car, and they could afford to send their kids to college. When I was your age, I didn't have any money, but you kind of didn't need to. We were kids, we were young, we were blah, blah, blah. But we all had hope. Oh, the times will change. There was a sense in the culture. There wasn't this desperation in the air. There wasn't this, it's so hard in the air. And I'm sorry, Democrats were presidents. We had control a lot of that time as well.
Yeah, so I'm someone who's very prone to desperation. And I don't know, I think it might come from a place of like I do have, I'm a human, so I have a systems of belief, but I also address every issue kind of on the merits that I love paying attention to the details on policy and addressing every issue on the merits. And right now, it's like one of the worst times to, I think, be someone who loves looking at the details of everything and just maximizing positive outcomes, especially with like Doge, and things like that. And so just as someone who has kind of desperation about every issue, kind of how do we hold hope in moments like this?
Well, first of all, if you're not depressed right now, what's wrong with you? And that's been true for years. Sometimes feeling bad about something is a functional, not a dysfunctional response. The Americans to be worried about are those who don't think there's a problem. There's a serious, serious problem. So right now, I've been saying, if you're not depressed, what's wrong with you? I've been saying it for a long time, because something has now just reached the surface as these all-out horrifying symptoms of a disease that's been with us for quite a while. So the first thing you do is to realize this is a very serious moment. Our grief is understandable. Our panic is understandable. Democracy is under assault. Whether he's a Russian asset or not, he's mimicking the behavior of one. If you were an enemy of this country, would you be doing anything differently than is happening right now? I'm sure you guys know who Curtis Yarvin is. You're becoming very aware of the whole techno-bro plan here. This is serious. These people find democracy inconvenient to their purposes. And this is a long festering plan, really to destroy the government so that the private sector led by a few, billionaire dictatorial class can run everything. So if you're not depressed by that, you're not even here. Okay. But the point is, we've had tough, desperate times before. We had slavery in this country, and a generation rose up. They did not have the power, but they had the truth on their side. They had justice on their side. They rose up, they pushed back, and we went from slavery to abolition. We went from the institutional suppression of women to the 19th Amendment. We went from the Gilded Age to the establishment of organized labor. We went from segregation to the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act. Those were very, very tough things too. Sometimes we need to identify the problems in our past, but I think it's important to identify with the problem solvers. So we have had it so relatively easy that we haven't cut our teeth, even when we should have been. The fact that we allowed this to happen, the fact that we listened to the DNC, starting with the suppression of Bernie, even the suppression of me, what was everybody thinking? How much more obvious could it have been? The de-amplification and the peripheralization of anybody who was saying, this is fucked up. And if we don't show up for the working people of the United States, we're not going to have a shot. So first of all, David, if you look at history, let's not be the first generation to wimp out on doing what it takes to put this country back on track. Surely they had desperate days. Surely they had desperate days. Now, because I believe very strongly in, just like in healing the body, you have to have an integrative approach. It's not just external remedies, but it's also psychological and emotional aspects. This is a whole systems breakdown. And so it's going to take a whole systems response. So at this point, it's not just what we do, who we have to be, it's who we have to be in order to discern what to do, in order to be able to do it. This is an assault on our nervous system. They know exactly what they're doing. They're not just assaulting us on the level of policy. Those tanks are running through town on an attitudinal level, but it's a classic fascist, don't even think about fighting, don't even think about pushing back, but people are. So what they say in AA, get into the solution. Anything you do on any given day, David, and by the way, when you look at what happened in the White House yesterday, the fact that the cabinet members said this isn't working, the fact that the head of the RNC is telling, Congress people in the Republican Party don't even have town halls, it's because people are are participating in screaming about this. And that's what we need to be. Beyond that, whatever you do, David, that is your way of taking care of your nervous system. It could be religious, it could be spiritual, it could be secular. But it has, whether it's yoga, whether it's prayer, whether it's meditation. But this idea of thinking it can only be handled from here up is obsolete 20th century thinking. When I was called fringe, no, they're fringe. The political system, particularly the Democrats, they are stuck in 1995 somewhere. And so for us to be able to handle the grief, we are in a catastrophic moment. We are. So who do you have to be within yourself to handle that? Because a lot of the people who actually brought this on us are now crumbling. Because the only mode of problem solving that they know on that level, we've been checkmated. So we have to become, as Einstein said, we will not solve the problems of the world from the level of thinking we were at when we created them. And that's why what's happening now is you guys are not even 20th century people. You're not even 20th century people. Were any of you even born in the 20th century?
No.
Even if you had been, you would have been there for a few years while you learned to walk. The mindset of the 21st century is integrative. It's holistic. David's ability to handle this psychologically and emotionally is as important as your understanding of policy. Now, the guys who now run the world, particularly the Democratic Party, they don't know from that. They call that crazy because they're stuck in the 20th century. You're not. And so exercise, make sure you've got those endorphins, appreciate that it's an attack on your nervous system, whether it has to do with food, stay away from inordinate drugs, use of drugs or alcohol. We've got to be athletes for this. You've got to give yourself the container to be able to do this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think one thing that would be more aligning with being more genuine as with our party and with our politicians is mixing the personal with the political. And I appreciate you mentioning cutting your teeth, because for all of us, we still, for all intents and purposes in politics, have our baby teeth. We haven't gotten to that next level yet.
How old are you, Dylan?
I'm 21. All of us are 21 or 22, I believe, right? Yeah.
You're 21?
I'm 19.
Yeah.
Do you know how old James Madison was when he wrote the U.S. Constitution?
21 is
Those
my
guys
guess.
were so young. Check it out. Check out the ages of the founders.
But I wanted to ask you, you had previously mentioned that your 20s, you described it as your wasted decade. What advice would you have for people like us, for our listeners who are in their early 20s, or how do you mix the personal and the political? How do you push forward in your 20s? What should we be focused on learning?
A lot has been, my entire life and career have been mischaracterized, but one of them is the idea that I was such a bad girl in the 20s. I simply was in my 20s. My 20s were very garden variety. Drugs, sex, and alcohol is what you do in your 20s. Now, maybe you don't specifically in your life, but the idea of being wild and crazy and that's what the 20s are. And the 20s are hard. The point is, they're not a mental illness. They're hard. You're individuating. You're having your first love affairs. They're hard. And particularly now with the economics the way they are. So what I would say to you is, don't let them, and they do this to women even worse than to the men. Don't let them make you think that because the 20s are hard, there's something wrong with you. Don't let don't let a multi-billion-dollar industry convince you that there's something wrong with you because life is hard in your 20s. That's number one. Number two, if you're old enough that they would put a gun in your hand and tell you to go fight a war, then you're old enough to own your own opinion. And your power has nothing to do with your age. The older you are, the more you know certain things. And the younger you are, the more you know certain other things. You guys know much more than I do about what's happening now. I know much more than you do about certain patterns that come around over and over again. And that's why this intergenerational thing is really a significant relational pattern. In the Talmud, it says every generation has its own wisdom. When you read about some of the most famous people in history and how old they have been, some of the greatest artists. Now, I'm not saying have an overinflated view of what you're capable of when you haven't experienced certain things. I'm not saying that. I mean, every generation is arrogant, but I think all of the generations of all the people on the earth right now have taken that to an extreme. I also think that we are too divided about generations. I think this has really served to disunite us. All identity politics has. I think we need to start thinking about generations as whoever is an adult at the time. I don't care if you're 18 or 80. It's your job to think about what's happening in America and what we're going to do about it. But in terms of your being young and going through certain things, I think the 20s is a time of exploration. You guys, I assume none of you have children yet. Those kinds of serious things will come, but they're not here yet. Enjoy yourself. Enjoy yourself while you're young. You know, when you're young, you can't really imagine not being young anymore. So don't forget to enjoy it. But also the pain of that, I mean, it's a tough decade, but just please remember, doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. David, I can tell that's been done to you. You know, David gets anxious or David's going through what it is to really become a man, to become everything. It's hard. It doesn't mean something's wrong with David.
And we're thankful that David doesn't have kids too.
Well, it's not time. You know, there are seasons in life, and he's going through everything that he needs to go through. And in time, very different things will be happening. But don't miss this decade. Don't miss the fun of it. Don't miss hanging out, listening to music. Don't miss the lusciousness of it. Don't miss the sex of it. Don't miss it. Don't miss all that. And there's a beauty to every decade. But the pain of it is just, number one, like I said, it's a painful moment in history. And number two, 20s are hard, but they're not a mental illness.
I love that. And
got it?
Really appreciate it. That's like awesome. I'm definitely going to think about that going forward. But I wanted to shift gears to something a little random I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned movies a couple of times today. And one of my favorite things I've watched of yours was an interview you did with James Cameron, the Avatar director.
Avatar.
And so I was just curious, because I know that was a couple years ago. Did you see the second Avatar? And did you like it? And
I didn't. I can't believe I didn't. I just thought Avatar was such a perfect illustration of what's happening on the planet, told in cartoon form. I was, people just were so hideous towards me. And during all that, and because I pointed out to James in that interview that when I was in the Middle East, and I had been talking to some Israelis and Palestinians, they were talking about that movie. People just excoriated me for that. And then we showed them actually the press, the press about the fact that many Palestinians had said that they felt that they were so much like the figures in Avatar. But no, I haven't seen it. Isn't that ridiculous that I haven't seen it? Is 2 as good?
I thought it was much better, in my opinion. It's like one of my favorite movies the last few years, but...
well, I have to, he's got something like 8 planned or something.
Yeah, I think the third one's supposed to be this year, so I guess you got time.
I wanted to see it in a theater. I wanted to see it with the glasses. I didn't want to see it just on the computer, and then circumstances. I think it came out when I was recovering from surgery or something. I didn't. But thank you for telling me that, because I'll make sure if I get the opportunity, I will again. He's such a genius. We could really use him right now.
People always say, Marianne Belay, you focus too much on politics. So funny story, I've kind of been involved and interested in politics since I was in the 7th grade. 2015, I was a pretty big Bernie supporter. They called me a Bernie bro back in the day. But I was a big Bernie fan, and I think that's why I got into politics. And in 2020, when I was 17 years old, I have a memory of you on stage with Bernie in Texas. And I think you had just endorsed him. You ended your campaign, and we all talked about how, we all were watching those debates when we were 17, 16, and how there was a moment where you turned to the camera and you spoke directly to the camera. And that was one of the most authentic moments of the debate. Ben and I were actually talking about this last night. So I have this memory of you on stage with Bernie Sanders, and you were speaking. Was it in Houston? I'm not too sure. It was in Texas. It was some part of Texas.
Well, after the one you're talking about where I went and endorsed him and all of that, that was in Austin. But that debate that you're talking about, there was one in Florida and one in Detroit.
Yeah. And we remember.
And then, of course, they wouldn't allow them this time.
Even though, I think that's kind of the whole conversation. Circling back to your 2020 campaign before we get into your 2024 campaign real quick, what are some things that you learned that you were shocked about either the American people? I mean, we talked about how we kind of know that the DNC hasn't always been the most transparent, right? But what are some things that you learned meeting with people? And I know you've been doing this your whole life and you've been out there, but what are some things you learned stepping into the political arena that you didn't know before?
I didn't know how corrupt the system is. And by the way, the difference between 2020 and 2024 was quite great. I was given that which would approximate a fair shot in 2020. And as a minor candidate, I felt that I was given, there were some things that were unfair and uncool, but in general, I was given by the medians, et cetera. 2024 was really vicious and dark and corrupt. The guys at top decided it was Joe, and then the de-amplification of my campaign and anyone else who wanted to take him on in partnership with CNN and MSNBC, the character assassination, it was very dark. So I have learned that the system is very corrupt. However, in both campaigns, I also learned that while the system was even worse than I feared, the American people are even more wonderful than I would have hoped. And David, when you said, where do you get your faith right now? That's where I get my faith. The American people are a decent people. What has happened here is not the people's fault. I think that's so important. And even when I mentioned a couple minutes ago that, they're shouting at these Republican congressmen, we have 69 million Americans who get a Social Security check every month. Now, Social Security has never missed a payday in its 80 years since Franklin Roosevelt signed it into law. You guys, this is something where, an example, the intergenerational thing. You guys can't imagine yet, and you have decades before you will, what it means when your body starts breaking down, what it means that your usefulness is greatly diminished in terms of participation in the economy. You can't really imagine the level of vulnerability that comes about for millions and millions of people once they reach a certain age. And that Social Security check, which they earned, is the reason they can have dinner. The reason they're not living on the street, which they're aware 700,000 people are. It's the reason they can have even a modicum of dignity in their lives. So you want to see the spirit of the American people that I believe in? Watch what happens if those Social Security checks stop coming. You watch what happens to Medicaid if they go after Medicaid, which right now they're proposing to do an $180 billion cut. So what do I get my faith from? I get my faith from a knowledge of history. We push back slavery. We push back institutional suppression of women. We established organized labor. They desegregated the South. A knowledge of American history makes you see that there has always been baked into the cake. It's our characterological DNA. It's been here literally from the beginning. We are both and. We have reiterated in every generation the struggle between the most enlightened principles that have ever been imbued in the founding of a country and genuinely evil forces who find real democracy inconvenient to their ideological and or financial purposes and have proven that they would perpetrate all manner of atrocities in order to block it. It's no different today. It's no different today. The circles just come around again. So my faith, though, comes from what I've seen in both campaigns, and that's what makes it both kind of was heartbreaking for me, but also gives me hope. The American people, what happened, for instance, in 2024, the DNC acted like a suppressant. It's like all this energy was bubbling up from the top. This was true with Bernie, and it was true with me. All this energy bubbling up from the bottom, but they're like a top, a lid on it. Keep a lid on it. Keep a lid on it. And because I didn't have the fame of Bernie, I didn't have the whatever Bernie, plus games that were played on me that would not have worked with a man, with a senator, all that stuff. I couldn't break through that, and I regret that. But what I saw, I got almost 500,000 primary votes, which, given the level of de-amplification, is pretty impressive. And I hope that next time somebody wanders out there giving that kind of a message, that the psyops used against them will not be so successful. Because I'm sure the system will do what the system does. But I also think that there's a new day at the DNC, and I don't think that Ken Martin will, he'll do his best to keep that kind of thing from happening in 28, I think. We've been in contact with him, and he's actually he's been nice to us, and we're trying to get him on the podcast. He was supposed to come on back then. He's really busy. Yeah.
But I like a lot of the stuff that he's been saying in that, like, and I just think of the Democrats. I think the vision of Democrats, the perception of Democrats for a lot of people in America is that, especially after the whole Biden thing, you want to admit it or not, we seem like the party that covers up stuff. We don't seem transparent, and it's exactly what you're saying, is that we don't seem authentic. It feels like we have all these talking heads that go out and send out messages, hey, say this, say that, and I can't. There's so much to get into the consulting class, and I think that's brain rotted people in DC and Democrats. There's so much to talk about that, but I think I'm excited with Ken Martin being the DNC chair, and I'm really looking forward to having an actual conversation in 2026, 2028. I like a couple people out there. Maybe you'll run again, and I'll be on that campaign. But I'm excited. I'm excited about the future, even though, like, David and I always grapple about this. I always call him a doomer. I'm like, David, stop dooming. I'll call him in the middle of the night, and he's dooming. He's texting me in the middle of the night. Ukraine is gone.
Can I defend myself? Can I defend myself?
Yes.
So I'm very okay. I have.
Wait, speak
I was gonna
closer.
say I have a good opinion on people and their own responses to things in their own lives and their feelings of justice and equality and what they deserve. And I think, like, the average person, if you speak about democracy in the simplest terms, you're going to get very favorable responses. But I'm just concerned about, like you were saying, the systems that you've noticed throughout your life, Marianne, and those undue influences and very complex systems coming together. And that's what keeps me up at night, is all those confluences in, like, very complex ways that they don't come up in political discourse. They don't even come up in, like, the second or third, like, sub-level of political discourse. They're very deep, and some people don't even notice them at all. And it's those kind of things that worry me, those broad historical trends, like the intersection of many systems. So that's why
You're right. You're right. I mean, if you only look at this through a material lens, we're cooked.
I like that word.
But I don't believe in just a material lens. I have a Substack, and yesterday the article was about conviction. And conviction is a force multiplier. And the problem we have is that, what is that in the Yeats poem, the best lack all conviction, the Crouching Towards Bethlehem poem, the famous poem? What we have is right now, obviously, a tyranny by minority. But that minority of extreme right, they are very convicted. So the way the power of conviction operates is if you have 10 people who are convicted that we should destroy democracy, and 100 people who, no, I really like democracy, and like if you want, I have Thursdays between 2 and 4, I could show up for something. If you have 10 convicted people and 100 kind of sort of sometimes when it's convenient convicted, then the 10 people, their views will carry the day. This is something in us that has to stand up now. There is something in us. I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees. It's a characterological. It's a fierceness that patriotism demands of us now.
I love that. I wanted to ask you, in 2020, I was also a big Bernie bro. And I remember one of those first debates, seeing you, and I was so impressed. We were just talking about it. When you like turned direct to camera and you kind of did your like what I would say to Trump basically on the debate stage, and I think that's aged really well in my opinion. And you were saying like this man has reached into the psyche of America and he's harnessed fear for political purposes. I'm going to harness love, and I'll meet you on the battlefield. And first of all, I thought it was just like insanely well executed and way more charismatic and strong than everyone else on that stage for the most part. But also, I think you kind of touched into something deeper where Democrats maybe tried to fight Trump like a normal politician and just try to like talk about some policies that are bad that he wants to propose, or say, actually, this thing we're going to do is going to save you X amount of money. But that it was really Trump was running as something deeper, and it had kind of like grabbed the minds of Americans. And I don't think Democrats really attempted to counteract that. Is that something that you feel like has become even more true since you said it in 2020?
Absolutely. I mean, this time even more so. And in that same debate, I said, if you think this wonkiness will be able to handle the dark psychic force of the collectivized hatred this man has unleashed in this country, then I'm afraid the Democrats are going to see some very dark days. That was my line. If I had even just said dark psychological forces, but because I said dark psychic forces, I was the doppelganger of me as joke, crystal lady, crazy, which is an ancient trope, by the way, against women who color outside the lines. You know, she's crazy, she's crazy. But boy, does that age well. If you think you're wonky, this is going to be able to take on the dark psychic force of collectivized hatred this man has unleashed in this country, then I'm afraid the Democrats are going to see some very dark days. And boy, we are seeing some very dark days. You know, you were talking about the midterms. I think we all just wish it was happening tomorrow. And I'm also, my biggest fear, you know, David was talking about just, you know, the fears that you can get into. My fear has to do with Elon Musk. Elon Musk scares me much more than Donald Trump does.
I agree. He's the most terrifying person on the planet.
Absolutely. And I mean, a lot can happen from now and then, but between now and then, the fact that he's in everything, my concern is about the vote in 2026. The way things are going, I have no doubt the American people would reject this insanity. But whether they will allow, given his unbelievable power, to really allow a free democratic election in 26, that's where my panic goes when I allow myself to go there.
Well, I mean, I guess the good news is that we don't have, you know, federal elections. Luckily, that's what keeps me from. That's what everybody's told me. That's what I've heard. That's the last step.
You're saying for him to be able to do it in all 50 states, especially for the House. You're right. So it's really the House that we're talking about. Those are
Well, but and I mean, even if you know, there was luckily, but I've always heard that the last step in authoritarian transition is complete faking of election results. But you know, we're also moving very quickly in terms of authoritarian techniques. So it's
absolutely.
I don't know. I don't know. I
absolutely
think
we are.
I think he has capabilities so far beyond just like common discourse that I don't even want to speculate on. So
the psychological and emotional and even spiritual powers of radical availability at this point is key. that we all be radically available, radically receptive. Gandhi was asked who is the leader of the Indian independence movement, and his answer was the small, still voice within. In all of our lives, it could be your social media, it could be something you're going through with school, what you're learning, it could be your own education, it could be participation. Well, listen, what you're doing, it could be this podcast, anything any of us are doing to generate the energy. Anything, any day, if you generated energy in the direction of the solution, that was it. Because we all have to remember there are millions of people, millions and millions and millions of people who feel about all this exactly as we do, who are having basically the same conversation we're having in their own way, not only in this country, but actually all around the world. And I think that really helps. Just remember, you're not stranded on a little island here. Like, doesn't anybody see this? People do see this. People are freaking out. But as long as you do anything that puts out energy and that's why I made a video. We were editing it right before I came on, saying to people, let's see this meeting at the White House on Wednesday as a win. For every tweet you put out there, every TikTok you made, and I'm so proud of people who are out there. I'm proud of Senator Merkley actually asking on the Senate floor, is he a Russian asset? I'm proud of some of these young TikTokers, particularly the women. I'm sorry, can we give it to the women who are some of the stuff that's being exposed out there and being said? So I think, there's a lot to, you owe it to your country not to allow yourself to spiral down. And for you, David, you've got to see a floor. It's like somewhere around your waist. When you feel yourself spiraling down, there's a point past which it cannot do you or anyone in the world any good for you to go further down. And at that point, you say, cynicism is an excuse for not helping. And this is, like I said, it's internal powers that we're having to harness and navigate right now. I think our generation, and by our generation, I mean all the adults at this point, have become we coddle our anxiety too much. You guys were trained to. And I'll tell you something, that's what a lot of people like about Donald Trump is this is the way it is. We got to be a little more, this is the way it is. We need, if I become president, I would be as audacious as he is, but just within the law and on the completely end of the political spectrum. Because, and this is where I thought you were going, Bella, a while ago, and then you went somewhere else. The Republicans win elections, and to them, that's our mandate. And they're right. That is your mandate.
Exactly.
And they use power. Now, they abuse it. They go too far. But Democrats will get, we
go
didn't
around
really,
the circles.
right, we don't have a mandate. The parliamentarian said we can't. And we appear spineless. They're shameless. Yes. We're spineless.
At least try. At least show that you're trying.
Well, that's the thing with Obama. At least try. Don't give up on the negotiation. Anyway.
No, and I think to Biden's real quick. To the Biden administration's credit, they did try on student loans. I have friends who worked in the Department of Education.
I agree with that.
They got stopped. They did it again. They got stopped. They did it again. And it's things like that they actually tried with. The American people saw it, and he got credit on that. So that's what I'm saying. At least go and fight and try. And if you don't get it, guess what? The American people will be able to see that you at least tried for them.
And he needed to articulate that. That's what we were talking about before. They don't talk their walk.
That was hard. Yeah.
If you don't push to the maximum legal bounds you can within the power you have, you do democracy like a dangerous disservice. But to me, like it's like equally as dangerous, not equally as dangerous, but like information-wise, that you don't show people how democracy works, especially in a federal system as opposed to or a presidential system as opposed to a parliamentary system. You have to like show that you have power when you win, or people don't care. So
that goes back to education, though. What you just said is above the head of the average American, and it shouldn't be. The average American should be able to understand what you just said, and the average American would not. Access to education, like access to healthcare, like access to educational, and economic opportunity is within the purview of a shrinking group of people. And then they turn to you and to me and said, no, you're the elite we got to fight against. No, you've got it completely upside down. Those who are educated, I mean, it's almost like the Chinese Revolution around here sometimes, the Cultural Revolution. We got to get rid of the thinking people. I don't think so. More people just need to be taught to think much earlier. And the Democrats were there when it happened. I'm sorry, the Democrats.
Can we stay on this topic? Can you explain a little bit more what you saw in 2024? You were brave enough to stand up to the establishment, right? You were the one to say, I'm a free thinker and I think this is wrong. I think we need a change. Can you talk a little bit more about 2024, coming back and challenging them? Like, what was your experience?
I felt that I felt that the Democratic Party had strayed from its unequivocal, unabashed advocacy for the working people of the United States. And I felt that anything less than that would not be able to defeat Trump in 2024, that we had to stand for universal health care. We had to stand for Medicare for all. We had to talk to people about, remember in 2016, Bernie and Trump were the two people in 2016 who said to the American people, the system is rigged against you and you have every right to be mad. The difference is Bernie meant it. Trump just saw it as a way to close the deal. Hillary made the fatal error of saying, everything's great, let's just continue with the success of the last 8 years. There were millions of Americans who were like, what success, lady? I'm drowning here. And I don't know if the DNC had not put their hands on the scale, none of us will ever know. I don't know, had they not put their hands on the scale, I don't know if Hillary or Bernie would have won the primary. But whoever it was, Trump would never have been president because Democrats would have felt good about the election. That's what I believe, and that's what the polls actually indicated. But the polls didn't even matter to that elite. So that was in 2016. So you probably know that after the 2016 election, are you all aware of the court case that was brought by some ex-Bernie? Right. So the court said are unbelievable, but they decided in favor of the DNC when the DNC said, hey, we're a private corporation. We don't owe people a fair election. It's all performance.
Sorry, I was going to say that sounds exactly the same to me as when Texas was defending excluding Black people from all white primaries.
That's exactly what it is.
That's exactly what
No
I thought
different.
of. Sorry,
no different. So in 2024, in 2020, I knew I'd be a minor candidate, but like I said before, I felt I had some things to say, and I felt I was given, something approximating fair opportunity to express myself. In 2024, I knew, not just because of his age, but I could feel, I have a career of over 40 years. And I knew that what happened in 2016 was the anger of people that was harnessed for political purposes. In 2024, what I felt out there was the despair of people, unsustainable levels of despair. And I did not feel that Joe Biden was responding to that despair in the ways that were necessary. And I kept waiting for someone to run. I kept waiting. Well, maybe, I don't know, Pritzker will run. Maybe somebody will run. Somebody. And then I realized nobody's going to. And I went, well, I will. Because we have to give the American people.
Yeah.
And they were all just sitting back because the DNC had said, no, we're going with Biden. And by the way, they promulgated such lies. We don't primary a sitting president. Well, hello. Lyndon Johnson was the sitting president. When
Jimmy
Eugene
Carter
McCarthy
primaried
him by Teddy Kennedy. Eugene McCarthy primaried Johnson and then Bobby Kennedy Sr. And that is actually what made Johnson drop out because he did poorly in New Hampshire in comparison to Eugene McCarthy. So if people had primaried Biden, it would have become very clear very fast that he was in some level of cognitive decline. And what they did was, right after I announced I did an interview on ABC with Jonathan Karl, and somebody up there went, "Get rid of her." The decision had been made, and she's a spoiler. Well, you can't be a spoiler when you're running as a Democrat. This is basic civics. Once again, too many even Democrats and this codependent, oh, no, we cannot entertain anyone but Biden. We're going with Biden. We're going with Biden. Well, that's not democracy. Democracy would have handled this. The way to fight a threat to democracy is through more democracy. So they were not amused and were quite vicious. So anytime people talk about how vicious the Republicans are, I'm like, well, guys, don't kid yourself. Did that answer your question? I'm sorry, but did that answer your question, Max? Did it? I'm sorry.
Yes, sorry. No, I mean, I was interested in hearing your perspective, since you and it was Dean Phillips, right, were the only ones who.
I ran, and then soon after me, Bobby Kennedy. The fact that we lost the wellness community to the Republicans, it just devastates me. And you were mentioning the debate stage in 2020. When I had pointed out that we didn't have a sickness care system, we didn't have a healthcare system, we had a sickness care system, and that in order to deal with that, we would have to look at our food policies, our chemical policies, our agricultural policies, and then whoever it was, Chuck Todd or whomever, get the mic away from that woman. Most of the food warriors that have been out there, most of the food activists have been Democrats. And the fact that we let Bobby Kennedy take all that to the Democrats. Bobby tried to call Kamala, and it's kind of like how she wouldn't go on Joe Rogan. She wouldn't even meet with him. She wouldn't even take his call. The Democrats had been acting like they were trying to shrink their own base, like you have to be good enough to be a Democrat, like you have to audition to be a Democrat. Anyway, I hope that those lessons will be learned by people such as yourselves. There will be others. I hope that in 2028, what they're doing right now is already talking, like you said, about the Whitmers. And I like Pritzker. I have to say, of the traditional people, I do like Pritzker.
Do you like Wes Moore from Maryland? I have his book.
I do like Wes Moore. I think he probably has some more little growing, growing to do. But yes,
he's a visionary. That's what I like about him.
He seems that way. And Pritzker, I'm not real fond of the real corporatists like Whitmer and Newsom and same old. I don't think that will be enough. And there might be some other voices that we don't even know about. Democrats have got to get over this idea that you have to be in the club. The Republicans don't make that mistake. Vivek Ramaswamy, whomever, the Democratic elite feel that the qualification that's necessary is that you're qualified to perpetuate the machine as they already run it.
And
what do you? I know he's a little bit more. I know he's a little bit probably more conservative than you, but what would you think about someone like Mark Cuban fitting in that like outsider thing? I know he's a billionaire, so obviously there's
from Texas
issues
too.
there, but I think he probably would be pretty successful electorally, in my opinion. What are your thoughts?
Well, I saw that yesterday, and I thought, that's so Democratic Party. Mark Cuban's from outside the system. They don't have a problem with it because he's a white male billionaire. Whereas, I was a cuckoo, crazy crystal lady. So as a woman, I bristled a little, but I think I will be with everybody else. Like, we just got to win in 28. It's so important. I'm not a purity test type person. I've heard Cuban say some things that I thought were cool.
I like what he's doing with his company, the drug. I actually think that's something that I respect.
Yeah. Yes. Although I would rather he say Medicare for all.
Yeah. I think so.
But yeah, I mean, I think his heart is in the right place. I hate the fact that we've come to the point where unless you're a billionaire, you're not. But yeah, I mean, I think we've all got to fall in line to the extent that let's have an election. There need to be debates. We need to hear what everybody says. That's what a primary should be.
Yeah.
The Democratic voters need an opportunity to hear what everyone is offering. That's what we need to stand for. Democracy. We need to stand for no small group of people deciding it's Cuban or deciding it's Westmore, or deciding it's Pritzker or deciding it's Gretchen. None of that. Yeah. It's got to be, let the press and the party knows your job is to facilitate democracy, not to seek to engineer it or manipulate it. and there should be debates, and we should all hear from the people and get to know the people, unfiltered by gatekeepers and elite.
Come on
and
the Progressive podcast, maybe.
Absolutely, baby. I hope so. And listen, by the time it's 3 years from now, which is what that will be, I'm sure that your podcast will be. And if they're smart, they will. See, that's what the Republicans did. The Republican would have been on the equivalent of your podcast.
Yeah, they went on those types of podcasts that weren't inherently political, but they were speaking to that audience. And I think, just real quick, the shift amongst young men, the reason why we created this podcast, I think we all spoke about it right after the election, was I knew Max and Dylan, David and Ben, I actually met through Twitter. And we became good friends through Twitter. And the shift amongst young men, right? Biden had won them by 27 points. Trump won them by 2 points, right? And I think the part of the left that me and Max talk about a lot is like, look, the Republicans, if you agree with them on 50% of the issues, come into the club. Come here. Let's work together. But with a lot of the people, and I would say a lot of people that are on the left as well, you disagree with us on 1 or 2 issues, you got to get out of the club. We can't work together.
On such a level. And
I know you've experienced that.
I've experienced it big time. I was very left wing on Israel, but I do believe Israel has a right to exist. And the whole uncommitted vote, that's not good enough. So they were
It's the purity test that.
And they were voting for basically what would be Biden delegates. You can't allow one issue, no matter how important it is, to keep you from recognizing the larger story, which at this point is the salvation of our democracy itself.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to wrap it up. And look, when we thank you for your time, I know that you're a really busy person, and I know I'm a big fan of yours. So this is kind of a
thank you.
Cool thing to do.
Thank
and
you.
If you have any advice for us, if you want to serve as a mentor for us, I know that David is loving this because David's a doomer, and I can see it in his eyes. Him just being healed.
You guys text me anytime, day or night. Say, hey, can we talk? No, I love it. I'm at the point of my life and my age is that, I think we're the keepers of the story. Do you know what I mean? And that you pass it on to future generations. And I think that your generation and mine has there's a rapport and a resonance and an alignment. So yes, and that's why, like I said, there was a little bit of, why are you doing this podcast and why an hour? And these people, I'm like, no. This is where the action is energetically. So I'm honored to have been here and, absolutely be in touch with me anytime, anything I can do. I see great things. And if anything, have more confidence in yourselves, not from a sense of entitlement or swagger or arrogance, but a sense that you're grown men now. I'm Jewish, and at the bar mitzvah, the reason the bar mitzvah existed was because when you have a history of persecution, the only way the people could survive is if somebody became an adult here. And in societies where they have ceremonies of coming of age ceremonies, the society marks the entrance into adulthood. And America really lacks that. And that is having terrible repercussions because you have all these young men who are attracted to the alt-right, et cetera, because they see it's you and I know it's beyond toxic masculinity. It's malfunctional masculinity. But on the left, men have been made to feel shame about just being men. There's a divine masculine, not just a divine feminine. You're old enough. Own it. That's my advice to you, and enjoy it.
I love it.
That's my other piece.
Okay. We'll make sure Belay doesn't get too overconfident too.
Oh, God.
Yeah, keep each other, or tell me if there's a problem. You need to call him because he's way.
If we got problems, we know to call Marianne.
I'm going to I already told my professors Marianne Williamson is coming on my podcast. I was like, oh my God, I'm so excited to talk to her, and they know, and so I might get a little too overconfident.
That's crazy. That you definitely will be.
Well, I wish you guys the best, and I see great things for all of you.